Hi, everybody. I'm Assemblymember Robert Rodriguez, and I'm here. And welcome to Represent NYC on MNN Neighborhood Networks. And joining me today is Beth Finkel, the State Director for New York State for AARP, and my colleague in government, Senator Diane Savino. And we're here speaking about a tremendously important accomplishment, but also an opportunity and a path forward for New Yorkers to be able to begin saving for their retirement. And I'm going to take the moment now to, I guess, introduce Beth to talk about what this important piece of legislation that was signed into law. I mean, for folks who may have been following us earlier and listening to Diane, Beth, and I along the way on the journey for retirement savings for all in a program that's called Secure Choice, the news update on that is that it has finally been passed into law by Governor Hochul. It's Law A3213A, the Secure Choice Savings Program. Now, for folks who have not been following it, I'll let Beth talk a little bit about what this is, what it is for New York State, and how this is, very much on the forefront of changing the way that people save for retirement across the country. And then I'll let Diane talk about the legislative battles that we have fought together to get to this point, and what it means to her and her constituents, and then we'll wrap up with a little bit of the way forward. So Beth, what does this mean? What does this mean for folks that are retiring? What does this mean for folks who are thinking about retirement? I mean, AARP is not just people who are 55 and over. It also means the families of people who are represented by people who are 55 and older, and that's really everybody. So what does this program potentially mean for your constituents and also the state?
I have to start off by just saying that you, Robert, and Diane Savino, you two were the most incredible champions to help us get these bills forward at this time. So before we even get started, I think it's really important that folks out there know that this new law can actually affect over 2.5 million New Yorkers who go to work every day and aren't able to save for their retirement. So, wow, you guys really championed workers here in New York, and we're hoping, ARP is hoping, and we believe it'll be true, that many, many more people will save for their retirement. They will have a secure retirement, not just for themselves, but also for their family members and their neighbors and their loved ones. And so the difference in the quality of life for over 2.5 million New Yorkers, this is a huge accomplishment. So I just have to start off by saying that. I'm going to back up for 1 second here. As I said before, 2.5 million New Yorkers go to work and can't save in the workplace. Most New Yorkers who go to work have either a 401k or some sort of a pension, or if you work for a city government, you have, or any other government, not-for-profit, there are savings retirement plans within your workplace, so that if you choose to save for your retirement, it is automatically pulled out of your paycheck, either every week or every other week, depending on how you get paid. And what we know is that if it is automatically taken out of your paycheck, over 90% of people will participate in saving for their retirement. And that is part of this law that both the assemblyman and the state senator made sure that was in it. Also, if you work for a company with 10 or more employees, you will also be able to benefit from this, and you'll be able to save for your retirement. And that's what this is really all about. We want to make sure that people have the most robust and vibrant savings for their retirement. Right now, the average Social Security payment is about $18,000 a year. And if people are going to be solely dependent on their Social Security to have a secure retirement, we know that $18,000 is just not going to cut it.
Well, thank you, Beth. And I think it's really important that New York is not the first state to have implemented this. There are numerous other states. When we started this conversation, probably in 2018, I think we were talking about being the fourth state in the country to do this, behind Illinois, California, Oregon, and Washington. And I think, some other folks have caught up, but we had laid the groundwork to begin this conversation and talk about putting together a plan. And I think this step really changes it from really a framework for a plan for savings to really a robust system. But Diane, tell the viewers a little bit about how we got to this point and kind of why it's a passion for you, and your ability. And I will ask you to tell the story about, how for public employees, this has been really a rite of passage, and the reason why people enter into service that has not been available to really anybody outside of public sector or people who count on pensions. So those are millions of people. But Diane, what has this meant to you? And tell us about the journey here.
Well, first, thank you for hosting this, and it's been a pleasure to work with you and AARP on bringing us to where we are today. And you're right, I started my career in public service 31 years ago. It seems like yesterday. I was a young caseworker going to work for the city's child welfare system. And I often reflect that when you're in your 20s, you don't think you're going to be in your 30s. You never think you're going to be in your 40s, and you certainly never think you're going to be in your 50s. But the time passes very quickly. And it's in those early years that if you don't make the right decisions in planning for your retirement, you will find yourself in your old age relying solely on Social Security. And as Beth pointed out, that is not sufficient income for people to live in dignity. So a secure retirement is so critically important. And it's the kind of thing that people go into public service for. It's why, government is attractive to many people, whether they want to be in the civilian workforce or in the uniform workforce. It's that, defined benefit that they know that they'll contribute a portion of their income and be guaranteed a secure retirement. And a few years ago, looking at the statistics from AARP, we saw that that was becoming increasingly less likely for people who did not work in government. And, identifying the challenges for small businesses to be able to provide that. And remember, it's also an opportunity to recruit and retain professionals if you can offer them a secure retirement. But a lot of small businesses told us they just couldn't do it. They couldn't afford it. They didn't have the wherewithal to create that type of income security for retirees, and they wanted a way to do that. And so this secure choice retirement plan was exactly the type of plan that would work for small businesses, for people who weren't currently able to participate in a defined benefit plan like I have, like you have, Robert. And at the same time, we ran into some legislative hurdles, trying to convince the very people who benefited from a permanent pension, guaranteed under the state constitution, with compulsory participation. Remember, we're not voluntary. If you work for government and you are a permanent employee, you are compelled to participate in the retirement system. And so we had a very difficult time convincing our colleagues to do that. And in fact, the first round of this bill, which was passed in 2018, specifically did not compel people to participate. And so we set to work to change that. And we were successful this legislative session. And as it's been pointed out, Governor Hochul signed the bill. But it is somewhat ironic that the very people who benefited most from compulsory participation were opposed to it. And it took a little bit more effort on our part to convince them that we needed to provide the same opportunities to everybody. And I'm just happy we got where we are right now.
Perfect. So Senator, now that we think about the future, I think what's good about that point is we're talking about folks who are not the highest earners, who have, are looking to put things away, for retirement. And the misconception is that if you don't have a lot of money, then you can't save. And I think what AARP and the work that they've done around that and what we see happening across the country is no, on the contrary, they can save as much proportionate to what they're making as people who are making a whole lot more money. And that's why I think that, what we're talking about with this program is not just about providing access, but it's about making sure that there's just some basic financial tools that people have to be able to make decisions about their future. And I think our ability to put this in place really manages for the most marginal of our community in many ways that didn't even have access to the basic tools. So I'm excited about that, because what we're talking about, is everybody, be that the retail worker, the fast food worker, pretty much anybody, anywhere who's doing any kind of work has now an ability to save and take that with them on every job that they do. So it's not just the middle class or upper class worker that has the ability to save in a workplace retirement plan. But let's think about what happens next, right? Because I think now we talk about implementation. I know the Department of Tax and Finance is responsible for implementing it, but part of what we all know is that the follow through matters. So Diane, what do you think are the most important steps in terms of taking this and making it happen?
But most importantly, we have to make sure that both businesses and employees are aware that this program exists. So I think starting out, if you're an employer in the state of New York and you have more than 10 employees, if you already have a retirement plan in place for your employees, you don't have to do this, but you can add this. If you're an employer that doesn't have it, you're required to. Right? So this is a little bit of public education, making sure employers that currently don't have a retirement plan in place because they didn't realize that they could afford it, this is now available to them. And then for employees, that this is something that they can choose. I think you hit the nail on the head, Robert, when you said most people, they're afraid to make decisions for themselves because they don't really understand how to invest in retirement. And quite honestly, even those of us who belong to defined benefit plans, we don't make decisions about the investment strategies. We're compelled to join the system. The system makes those decisions for us, right down to the amount of money we're required to contribute, depending on whatever tier you're in. This is somewhat different. People will be able to make decisions about how much they want to invest, and there's a fear factor in that. Can I afford it? So it'll be a bit of education. Financial literacy, very important to people. And then I think the other thing is also making sure people understand there's a portability of benefit here. So if you move from employer to employer, you can take this with you. It's not locked in anywhere. So even if you don't want to stay working for someone for, forever, and maybe not everybody wants to stay 30 years, you can take this plan with you and you can continue to invest in your retirement, which, as we know, the older you get, the more complicated it is and the harder it is to save money, especially once you start having children and you have to plan for other things. So it's best to get in early and begin to invest in yourself, because trust me, you're going to be 55 before you know it. And you'll say, oh no, what happened?
Beth, you've been able to see these plans implemented in different places. And I know that when we talk about messaging, that it's really important to get the message out to folks who are 55 and over in their respective communities. How has AARP been able to help with that?
AARP in New York State has over 2.5 million members. So we've got a big audience of people who might be eligible themselves, but also they can share it with their friends and their neighbors and their family. Most important part of this is that companies really want to do this, and we're excited about that. We surveyed small businesses. I don't think small businesses ever didn't want to provide retirement savings programs for their employees. What they didn't want was to worry about the fiduciary responsibility of it, and they didn't want to worry about having to administrate that or any cost involved. And the beauty of this plan is there's minimal cost for the employer, and the fiduciary responsibility is taken over by the state, which was so brilliant of the two of you to make sure that that was put into place. So now we have the opportunity to have the state share that information. We will certainly help. And we particularly want to get out the word in communities of color, because we know that 2/3 of Hispanics are going to be eligible for this. They have not been able to save through the workplace. 60% of Asian Americans have not been able to save in the workplace, and 52% of African Americans. So we're gonna reach out to our partners in multicultural communities and have them help us spread the word too, because a lot of people are going to benefit from this.
Well, Beth, I'm glad you mentioned that because I get to wear another hat. Obviously, you mentioned a little bit earlier about the nomination to Secretary of State, and some of the work that we do does involve financial empowerment and licensing, and some of those communities, that you mentioned earlier, we touch in a number of different ways. Particularly, some of the people that we license include businesses that or industries that include, nail salons, gyms,
Mhm.
barbershops, very different kinds of businesses, but we also do touch every business that incorporates in the state of New York. So I think this is an important opportunity for us to have that conversation around, do you know what this is? Do you know what you can provide to your employees at that time? And also, do you know as employers and potentially licensees that this is available, and will be available to you with no real hassle, a hassle-free way to save for retirement. So I think the partnerships continue when we talk about what happens,
Mhm.
as this bill gets implemented. But I really very much look at it as one of the pillars for being able to empower communities of colors, communities of folks who are starting their own businesses, the small business community, and kind of say, hey, this is out there, and we're creating a real way for us to move forward. I think Diane, and let's go back to Diane. Diane, what do you think are some of the challenges around implementing this? And if we're talking about, the government side, how do we keep them focused on task? And I think, how do you see that unfolding? Because as legislators, we never stop looking at the bills
Mhm.
that we passed until until the program's up and running. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think the most important thing is the commitment coming from the governor's office. They have to make sure that this program is in fact up and running. The prior governor's office really didn't do that. And that was somewhat disappointing to us. We go forward and we create programs, we create boards, we create entities, and then you see them, just kind of stumble out of the gate because there's no commitment there. I fully trust that Governor Hochul is going to live up to her word when she enthusiastically signed the bill. She called me the day she signed it to tell me how important she felt this was. So I believe that she's going to put the right people in place to make sure that this is done. Because what good does it do to create a program if nobody knows about it? Because I think she's uniquely aware of those 2 million New Yorkers that Beth Finkel talked about that are approaching retirement that have no way to support themselves in any level of dignity. And that's really what it comes down to. We can't lose New Yorkers who are forced to leave our state because they can't afford to live here after having worked here, raised a family, spent their whole lives, and then are forced to go somewhere else because they can't afford to live here in their retirement. And so I fully trust that, Governor Hochul is going to, do more than just put her name on this law, that she's going to put her foot on it and make sure that it's fully implemented.
I think you're right, Diane. And and the fun part about me moving and transitioning is that I'm not letting this go.
Mhm.
This is something that I believe in, and I'm going to make sure that we do the right thing in terms of that. And I think, as I think about important next steps, the right executive director, right, forming this board, getting the right executive director. We heard
Mhm.
in another episode and met with the executive director from California, I believe, and they're doing a tremendous job in terms of, getting things up and running. And I think that's important for us to get in place, have that person who can make sure that we start to implement the pieces to, one, get businesses signed up, develop the regulatory framework around it, and starting to put this in place so that when funds do come in, that they're able to save them. And I think it's important to mention that this is not any kind of social welfare program. This is really allowing people to save their own money with a mechanism that we know works, that wasn't available to them before. The state controller does this for tens of thousands of employees, across the state, right? And does it successfully. And the fact that it's not available to millions because of a level of sophistication that we expect of people, is ways that government can actually do something
Mhm.
helpful, meaningful, and supportive of the business community, the small business community, and also to individuals. So I think that's why I think Diane, your leadership on this issue has been so important and so impactful in terms of making sure that people understand that, because of the strong ties that you have, across, those sectors.
Thank you. But believe me, I did not do this alone. It was you and of course AARP. We could not have done this without AARP showing up in their red T-shirts. When AARP shows up, people pay attention, and they were instrumental in getting this across the finish line, as they have been on so many other issues. And I have to tell you, it was a great pleasure working with them, because they were able to convince members who were somewhat unwilling to listen just how important this was.
No, and I think, Beth, to mention that the credibility of, getting that mailer or that advertisement talking about secure choice from AARP is something that, we know makes a difference, because we've seen those calls, happen in our offices. We've experienced those emails coming in and showing us that people in our communities can understand these issues and will be active in voicing their support for them.
And one of the things I think that was persuasive to some people is when we look at the human cost and the societal cost to seniors who are living in poverty, the amount of money the state of New York spends on programs like the Home Energy Assistance Program, the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption Program, SNAP benefits for seniors, because so many of them are living in poverty in their old age, at a point in their life when they cannot earn income, and their costs continue to rise, but their income is not rising with it. And so that was also a very persuasive argument, and we were able to convince members of that because we were armed with information that AARP was able to help us with.
Yes, and I think the timing is really what matters, right? I think it's important for us to get this program up and running very quickly, and making sure that the pieces are in place so that it's actually meaningful in terms of implementation. And I think that's one of the things that are important as we talk about, the future of secure choice. And I guess, Beth, there's been some conversation about how this gets rolled out in other states, and maybe if this becomes part of a national conversation. How do you see that unfolding? Obviously, we move ahead no matter what, but what's happening in the background? Are people understanding that this might be, the way forward in the future for everybody?
Absolutely. AARP has offices not only in the 50 states, but also in District of Columbia, Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And so we have 53 offices that are visiting their legislators, letting them know how important this is, and continually trying to push to make sure that people can have a secure retirement. We have hundreds of thousands of activists in New York, and I'm so glad that both of you referenced the calls that your offices get, because that's exactly what happens. We let our members know about an issue, and then if they are passionate about that issue, they let their legislators know. So we hope that people will continue to be involved in the fight that we make in so many issues, both the national arena, looking at Build Back Better bill right now, and infrastructure bill, and ways that we've really made improvements for people. But it's because of our members pick up the phone, send that email, or go and visit their legislators to make sure that this happens. And one more point that I wanted to make, Robert, because you mentioned this before about the other states. We're coming out of the pandemic. It's been tough sledding, for a lot of folks. What's striking to me is how, California opened up their program just a little bit before the pandemic hit, and they are doing incredibly well with enrollments. It's really surprising to me that in this difficult period of time, so many people have signed up to be part of the Cal Savers program. And so I expect that to happen in New York even more so, because we are going to get past this. We are going to one day be on the other side of the pandemic. We know that unemployment numbers, are going down, which is great. So more people will have that opportunity. And by the way, it's mandatory for companies that are 10 or more, but you can opt in if you're a company, if you're less than 10 employees. And as a matter of fact, if you're part of the gig economy, you're going to be able to be a part of this, which again, I have to thank both of you for your foresight. Yes. Thank you, Diane, if you want to add to that, because that was your thinking that helped make that happen, the both of you.
That is so important. Thank you for reminding me of that. Especially now as we see so many people are securing their income through either third-party delivery apps or app-based employment or more creative ways of obtaining employment. And they are oftentimes not thinking about long-term employment prospects and forget about thinking about their retirement. So yes, this was really necessary to add what we now euphemistically refer to as the gig economy.
No, I think that's tremendously important, Diane. I know how much work you're doing in that space, to create a suite of benefits for people. And, fortunately, this might be one that we don't have to include because we have it separately available. I think that's tremendously important, and really going to be transformative in terms of the way that people work and the way that people save. Last question or issue, I think, is in terms of timing. How much time did we give on this bill? Was it 1 year implementation or less? But
I think we give them a 1 year to develop it, and implement it.
so I think folks, keep an eye out on this. This is going to be up and running in a year. There's not anything that specifically you have to do. It will be, available via your employer as soon as it's up and running, and folks will have an opportunity to participate at that time. So we will keep you informed in terms of, ways that you can participate if you're a business owner, as well as if you're an individual who's interested in this as soon as the program's up and running and available. But we want you to be familiar with the term secure choice savings. We want you to be familiar with it when you hear about it from your employer, and certainly want you to to continue to participate when the option arises. So I want to just take a moment to thank Beth Finkel from AARP and Senator Savino for joining me at MNN Networks Represent NYC and having this really great conversation about laws from beginning to end, how we finally got it passed, and now we talk about implementing a transformative savings program for all New Yorkers to begin to save for their retirement. Thank you all for joining me, and have a great day.